Dear brothers and sisters, you know, one of the things that got very deeply embedded in my consciousness as a Filipino was the Panatang Makabayan. Maybe because this was, because we were made to recite it every day in school after singing the Lupang Hinirang, or our national anthem. But I must say that whoever composed the Panatang Makabayan must have drawn a lot of inspiration from our Christian faith. But before I explain that, let us just first recall the words of the Panata, which means not just a promise. A Panata in Tagalog is more than a promise. In fact, it is more than a vow. It is a pledge of commitment. That will be my, approximation of the meaning of Panata, a pledge of commitment. Here is my English translation for the Panatang Makabayan. It says, a pledge of commitment to my country. I love the Philippines. This is the nation in which I was born. This is the home of my race. She has nurtured me and cared for me and helped me grow into a strong, happy, and functional human being. In return, I will heed the counsels of my parents. I will follow the rules of my school. I will fulfill the duties of a nation-loving citizen who abides by the law. I will serve my country without hesitation and with faithfulness. I will always strive to become a true Filipino in thought, in word, and in deed. Well, that is the Panatang Makabayan for the Filipinos, the pledge of commitment to our country. Take note, it begins with, iniibig ko ang Pilipinas. I love the Philippines. It begins with love of country as an act of reciprocation to what my country is doing for me. Only after the articulation of this patriotic love do the rules and regulations follow. The adherence to law is founded on a relationship. What I am saying here is that this pledge of commitment must have drawn a lot of inspiration from the Christian faith, because it is exactly the same thing that we are now hearing in our gospel, where Jesus is saying to his disciples, kung mahal ninyo ako, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And he repeats it. He says it a second time towards the end. But there he inverts it. Ang sabi niya, whoever keeps my commandment is the one who loves me. Meaning, a faith that is not motivated by love is weak. A faith not motivated by love is nothing but an adherence to rules and regulations. In fact, you can hardly call it faith. It is possible to follow a set of laws because you are merely afraid of getting caught by the law enforcers in case you violate the law. And if that is all that motivates a person to follow the law, what happens when the law enforcers are not around? In English, there is a saying, when the cat is away, the mouse will play. The mouse is well behaved only when the cat is around. Well, this is all true if most of us still behave like mice and not as responsible human beings and citizens of our country. It means we have not really internalized yet the spirit of the law. And that is what the Panatang Makabayan incidentally is about. internalizing it. It was basically the same with the Jewish people and the Jewish faith, which some of the leaders, the Jewish leaders like the scribes and the Pharisees, tended to reduce to a set of laws, rules, and regulations, and multiplied them into mere human precepts. Well, you see, Jesus was precisely reacting to this tendency. For him, it was not in keeping with their faith as an Israelite people. Yes, they had the Ten Commandments, but the Ten Commandments were supposed to be founded on a relationship, which they called a covenant. They were never to be seen as just a set of rules or regulations imposed upon them. They were to follow them because they were committed to their God who loves them and who invites them to a special relationship with Him that we call a covenant. This is the reason why I often say I prefer to call the Ten Commandments Ten Commitments. Sa Pilipino, mas gusto kong tawaging 10 kasunduan kaysa sa 10 kautusan. Kasunduan. They are commitments. The commandments are meaningful only in the context of commitment to a relationship with God. If there is no such relationship with God, there is no sense in the commandments. That relationship has to be free. It is meaningless if it is imposed. Remember, the Israelite people were slaves. Before God invited them to a covenant relationship, what did He do? First, He liberated them. Because there can be no real covenant between a master and a slave. If the relationship is master and slave, it will be founded not on love. It will be founded on fear. That is why Jesus reinvents the relationship. In John chapter 15, He says, I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what the master is doing. Instead, I call you friends. He redefines the relationship and proposes friendship, the reciprocity of friendship as the basis for understanding covenant. He is not inventing these ideas, by the way. He is drawing them from His own Jewish faith. So again, faith that is motivated by fear is possible. But it is not only weak, it is meaningless. And I'm sad to say that there are still many Christian believers who are motivated by fear. I have seen even Catholic believers who are motivated by their fear of hell. People who do their religious obligations because they're afraid of God, because they're afraid of punishment. You know, this is the very idea that is beautifully expressed by John in his first epistle, in chapter 4, where he says in verse 18, listen to this very carefully. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives away fear. Because fear has to do with punishment, and so one who fears is not yet perfected in love. And then he continues in verse 19. He says, we love because God first loved us. Meaning, our love for God is merely our response to God's love for us. By the way, I have said this many times in my homilies. This is what Pope Benedict calls faith. He says, faith is the human response of love to the God who loved us first. Isang tugon. And remember, what John has just said, there is no fear in love because love casts away all fear. My dear friends, let me end with this thought. You know, a few days ago, I called your attention to what St. Paul says about the three virtues that he considers the greater gifts of the Spirit. In chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, he talks about the gifts, the charisms that are bestowed by the Holy Spirit on the community. And then in chapter 13, he's going to talk about the greater gifts. In fact, the conclusion of chapter 13 is where he says, these three, they are the ones that last. He calls them the greater gifts of the Spirit. And these are faith, hope, and love. But which of the three is the greatest? Which of the three is supposed to be the greatest? Not faith. In fact, Paul rubs it in when he says, even if I have faith that can move mountains, if I have no love, I am nothing. Remove love, faith becomes mere compliance, motivated by fear. Remove love, hope is not possible. Did you notice in the second reading, we heard about hope? Well, if faith is about allowing God's love to give light to your path as you pass through this world, hope is about allowing the same love to keep you going even when the way gets dark. And I tell you, we will be through some experiences when even the light of faith will make it difficult for us to keep going. Sometimes people go through a crisis of faith because of dark situations like what we are going through now. But if there is love, there will be hope. What is the difference between love and faith? Well, faith is enlightenment. You are being guided by the light. Hope is being guided in the dark. Meaning we can continue. We can keep going even when the way gets dark and difficult. Even when you reach what seems like a dead end. Even when you are tempted to despair, to fall apart, and to break into pieces. It is what makes you stubbornly believe in happy endings. And then you say, if it is not happy, then it is not yet the end. Please remember the three greater gifts: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.